Thank you for having me here. I'm very excited, even if my diction is terrible. So I wrote a poem about a translation I didn't actually finish or do, but it's translating Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part 3 in Tagalog. So this battle fares like to the morning's war. Ang labanang ito ay lumilipas katulad ng digmaan ng umaga. The first line of Henry's monologue in Shakespeare's hideous Forgotten Baby, Henry VI, Part 3, Act 2, Scene 5, is complete. In my ambitious project of translating the third part of a trilogy of what may be Shakespeare's worst plays, Shakespeare's least performed, I haven't even translated the first two plays, beginning with my favorite play and my favorite soliloquy. I have begun with a scene filled with the joy of stitching scenes together, beginning with the glorious soliloquy in which Henry details his deepest, darkest desire to be no more than a shepherd who loses the responsibilities of a king on the battlefield. The first line is easy enough to translate, yet umaga does not quite ring as true as bukang liwayway. The text says morning, not dawn, yet it describes how dying clouds contend with growing light. Mga namamatay na ulap, that is not quite the same either. Clouds fade, disappear, maglaho, but they do not die. Not in Tagalog, at least. The text is dying, not disappearing. Perhaps it is better to be faithful to the sense of my own language than to adhere to Shakespeare's precise words. The gift of Shakespeare is in his language. Clouds do not die, and I remain unsure if Henry should become Enrique, which does not quite seem as innocent and gentle. I cannot continue in the dizzying confusion of translation, yet I do. Shakespeare doesn't care whether morning becomes dawn, yet I do. So I continue. Ang labanang ito ay lumilipas katulad ng digmaan ng bukang liwayway kung kailan nakikipagtalo ang mga naglalaho na ulap at ang dumaraming liwanag. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, a question that I want to start us off with is by, like discussing the joy of translation, since I think that your love of translation is probably what's, making you discuss its difficulties in this poem. So, yeah, like, what's your favorite thing about translation?
Actually, my favorite thing about translation is that when you're translating something, you're not really translating words. It's more like translating concepts because a word in one language and a word in another language don't actually have one-to-one correspondence. They might have several different meanings, and if word in this language has a connotation in the same language, it might not have the same connotation in its translation in the other language, if you get what I mean. So what's really important is getting the concept across, and that's what I love so much about it, because you have to search for the best equivalent and you have to get the meaning across without losing the author's original style. And I really love that a lot because it's a challenge. And actually, one more thing is that I really like making texts accessible in different languages, even if I've never actually put out a translation on my own. I really enjoy showing it to people who would want to read it but wouldn't be able to because there's a linguistic barrier, and I really enjoy that a lot.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that made so much sense in like the insight that you have into like the one-to-one word translation. I think that that's definitely like interesting. Like you think that it's going to be easy to like plug it into like a dictionary and it's gonna work, but it just like never quite works that way. So yeah, I think it's interesting that your joy in translation is pretty much the same thing as what's the hardest part of translation. Yeah, I also want to ask, like, what's something that you prioritize in translation? Like, are you looking to replicate the syntax, perhaps? Like, what is it that guides you when you're making your choices in translation?
I For me it really depends on the type of text, because when it's prose, I try to get a feel of what the author's syntax is so I can just get the meaning across, and the literary style in general, maybe repeat the same words the author does. Sorry, I haven't drunk water. But when it comes to poetry, I really have to read a lot. Poetry, like, I mean, technically Shakespeare writes in poetry, but anyway, I try to read a lot by that author to get a sense of what their style is, because I have to replicate the meter also, and try. try to just replicate all the elements of their style. And that's what I really try to get across, I guess, because it's hard because you're really in a different language and you can't always replicate the same syntax. But what I enjoy is sometimes you have to reverse it, and I don't know, it just matters to me that the meaning is there and some of the essence of the author is also there. So an author who rambles a lot doesn't get cut into something short, etc., etc. It even if it's just the basics of the style, there's something that gets added in translation, and I find that really cool.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the reason that reading your poem was so like delightful for like I'm sure everybody, but at least like for me, is that I could watch the thought process and you'd be like, "Oh, like it's kind of hard to choose between these two." And I'm like, "Yeah, it is so hard. Like I don't know what would ever be a better choice if there even is such a thing as a better choice." So yeah, it's great to hear from you, what will guide you to make the choices. If you don't mind me asking a question that I didn't give you in advance, I like to ask you. So you said earlier that you do enjoy translating things that are just non-existent in other languages yet. So I'm wondering, do you feel like there's a difference in like translating literature versus translating like things that may not be classified as literature or just like everyday things like writing emails or whatever? Do you feel that there's a difference there?
When it comes to literature, because it really depends on the purpose of the translation. Sometimes I translate emails or text because my dad doesn't speak Tagalog, so I just try to get the message across, and it doesn't matter what the style is like. But when it comes to literature, it's frustrating because they don't get the same feeling of the style, and they don't get the same emotional effect. So it's really different.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that like it's the precision that's the difference maybe. Yeah, yeah, I definitely feel that. Yeah, so the last question that I have you is I'm interested in the particular fact that the work being translated in your poem is by Shakespeare, and you also say in your bio that you have a passion for, like translating Shakespeare. So you make it clear that it's his like quote hideous forgotten baby unquote, but the play is still put in very close proximity to the Western canon just by sheer virtue of being written by Shakespeare. And I want to ask, do you think that there's a significance in translating such like old slash cornerstone classic works or those adjacent to them? Like, do you find it important that the audience can access such works, and what might drive our interest in these works?
Okay, to be completely honest, my main reason for translating old things is that copyright makes it easier. So if I ever share it online, I'm not going to get anyone coming after me for translating a work that I don't have the rights to. But anyway, I actually figured that there's value still aside from copyright in it because it's an old work, but and it forms such an important part of the culture of certain countries. And wow, I really need to drink water, but it forms such an important part of the history and the society, and that's still not accessible in other languages, even if people want to learn more. Because not everybody can study a country and be like, oh, okay, I just want to learn the language now. I have to learn the language. So it's useful to have something to compare when you're studying. So I really think Shakespeare works for teaching English in general. So I think it's helpful to have his works translated in the original language of the person trying to learn English. But in general, I think it's really trying to make different histories and societies and cultures accessible, because that's what I enjoy a lot as well about translation. Well, I really enjoy everything about translation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. I definitely like what you said about how some works can be like so cornerstone and like important to entire cultures. That's definitely important. Um, you know, Around the end of last year, I just like emailed the publisher of one of my favorite poems and I was like, I want the translation rights, give it to me. And they're like, yeah, go ahead and do it. And then I like screamed for like 2 hours, but you should try it. You should just like email publishers. Sometimes they like to do it. Um, but yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation with you about translation. Is there anything else that you'd like to like put out there in this Zoom meeting?
No, I'm okay. I just want to say thank you. I hope I didn't wake up my parents, but yes, thank you.